I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hello, all spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture show with the Den of Geek Network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I'm your host, journalist, author, researcher of weird things, Aaron Sagers. You can also catch me as host of the Netflix series 28 Days Haunted and on the Travel Channel and I was going to say Discovery Plus, but now it's Max show Paranormal Caught on Camera. Yeah, we're on Max now. It's very exciting. Streaming things are afoot. Today, we are talking about the sociology of the haunt, of ghost stories, of fear. And we're doing so with a friend of mine that I've had the fortune of knowing her for several years now. And I just really love reaching out to her, and she's so gracious with her time all the time and inviting her on to talk about these topics. So we've talked about these things many times before, but we're going to add some new elements to this conversation because she just has so much insight on things. Her name is Dr. Margee Kerr. She's a sociologist. She's an author. She earned her PhD in 2009 from the University of Pittsburgh and currently teaches and conducts research on fear. And she looks into why people engage in scary experiences like haunted attractions, horror movies, paranormal investigations. She also has worked as a consultant for attractions and museums and is the author of Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear. And that was named a must-read by the Washington Post. She's the author of Ouch, Why Pain Hurts and Why It Doesn't Have to. And her work has been featured in the New York Times, Parade, Atlantic Monthly, NPR Science Friday, all over the place. She's very popular, which is why it's great that we get to have her on here. I get to call, make that friendship call, pull that friendship card. So Dr. Margee Kerr. Margee.
Hi. It's so nice listening to you. I get a nice self-esteem boost when I come on here. So thank you, Aaron.
Well, no, I get a self-esteem boost by having you as a guest. It's true. You are someone that I like to brag about knowing. I name drop you often because I'm like, I know I have cool friends that do cool things. And so I'm excited to have you here. And
I'm very happy to be here.
Well, to start with, I was thinking, have we really talked about Margee's origin story? I mean, why were you first interested in pursuing this topic, the science of fear?
Yeah, it has been a winding path to today, and not one that I ever really expected to be on. In the beginning, my focus was strictly on the traditional academic path of I'll get my PhD, I'll work in research, I'll focus on, health, the intersection of health and society and how, society impacts our emotions and all of this kind of stuff. And that's I saw that future for myself. And I also saw a lot of just being inside and confined to an office. And I just couldn't do it. And so I was like, I need to really start following what I'm interested in and really try and find a passion, because otherwise I'm just, my own mental health will suffer. So I kind of stumbled into the path in looking for something fun to do. It really started as with my passion of haunted houses. I've loved them ever since I was a kid, and I loved Halloween so much. I mean, Halloween is my favorite holiday, and it's in no small part due to the fact that it is associated with candy, and I love candy. And I would get my bag of candy and I would eat it probably within like 3 days. And I was always jealous of people who could save it for like weeks on end. But you also got to dress up, so that was really fun. And it was a holiday not associated with family. Like many people out there family holidays were not really always the most fun, but Halloween was one where it was family free and candy, friends dressing up. So I loved it. And I loved that haunted houses, mainly because my memories of haunted houses growing up were of a lot of fun and ridiculousness. And I have a really strong memory of going to a, thrown together little mini haunt on the stage in a cafeteria. But back in elementary schools, maybe they still have them, but it was like a combined theater, auditorium, and cafeteria. And you walk up the stairs, and I walked through, and I remember just screaming and laughing and telling my mom I want to do it again and again and again. And I loved it. I loved the feeling of startle. I definitely think that I have some thrill seeking in me, and that's just kind of always been there. I do like, running down hills with abandon, and not so much anymore. As you get older, you do tend to kind of get a little more cautious. But so I loved that. So growing up all through my life, whenever I wanted to do something fun, I found a haunted attraction and went. And when I went to Scare House in Pittsburgh and talked with the owners, they were like, let's work together. And I started working there. And, those seeds of questioning were really born around why we like this, why anybody wants to do this. It was one of those flashbulb moments of, oh my gosh, these people are standing in line for hours to be scared. For an experience that lasts maybe 25, 30 minutes, they're waiting in line for hours. What is happening? Why do I like it? What is it? And so I decided to put my research skills to work in answering that question. And it's just endlessly fascinating. Studying fear, you really are, you can't help but hit on pretty much every aspect of society and the individual's kind of characteristics. Fear is so central to so much of our life. It's such an organizing principle, for better or worse. And so that's what's continued to drive me is understanding how fear is working and functional or dysfunctional at a societal level and individually.
So with your studies, how do you define, some of the studies where you have, hook people up to these devices and watch how their brain is operating when they go through these haunted attractions and watching the physiological responses. You're a sociologist, but that also sounds a bit like psychology as well.
Yes, and that all the interpretation and fine analysis of the physiological data is thanks to my colleague Greg Siegel. He's a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Pittsburgh, and I can interpret and deal with the data after he's processed it and gotten it into a form that makes sense to me, and where I can look at the time sequence, and we use different markers to measure when events happen. And so, that I can look at and figure out kind of what's going on. And I can interpret the skin conductance, our kind of how much we're sweating when we get scared or just really excited. So I have had somewhat of a crash course in some of the basic physiological changes that happen when our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. But yes, I'm in debt to Greg Siegel for all of the finer processing that has to happen to turn any kind of EEG data and EKG data, skin conductance, all of that, to turn it into something that can actually be worked with. He can do all of that.
Well, in layman's terms, why do we, for people that haven't heard you speak and heard us speak before, in layman's terms, why do we love to be scared, and why is it healthy versus when is it unhealthy?
Yeah. So the natural high people talk about is real, when we are excited. And I use excited in the very kind of basic definition of the idea. So excited can be positive or negative. We can have a reaction in our body where our heart rate is increasing and we're sweating and we feel that energized kind of, oh my gosh, I'm going to burst out of my skin. So I think that is just excited, or it can also, it's also called arousal, a level of how activated our body is. So when we are in that state, we're producing all of these different, or increasing really the circulation of all of these different hormones and neurotransmitters and all of these changes in our body that in the right circumstances can be understood as feeling really good. And it does depend on circumstance a lot. So, when we are truly terrified and we know we've heard a gunshot and now we are running for our life, that feeling in our body is not going to be understood as good. We're not going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I feel really good right now running for my life. But, in a haunted attraction, those changes can make you feel, you can understand them as feeling powerful, like a superhero, or just scared, but in a good way, kind of like walking into a surprise party. So context is so important to experience those physiological changes as positive and euphoric. But we have the dopamine and serotonin and endorphins, all the things people talk about as kind of the feel good changes that are happening. But it's really important to think about the context of it too. So that's the second reason why we can enjoy being scared, is that the context is that we have chosen to do something that we know is going to be a little scary, that we know is going to stress our body, but that ultimately isn't really going to hurt us. And the beautiful thing about the human brain and experience is that even though we know we're not really in danger in those situations, so a haunted house or even just watching a scary movie, after it's over and we're not dead, we feel like we accomplished something. So it can be a real sense of accomplishment, and that's what we found in our data. But it's also as you're coming down from that heightened state, and you still have the circulation of some endorphins, and your parasympathetic nervous system is coming in to calm you down. You do feel a sense of accomplishment and a sense of feeling more kind of.
Oh. All right. I fear we may have lost Margee for a moment.
I'm back.
Margee.
Are you back, Aaron?
Oh, I'm back. I think our connection froze, but we seem to be back.
Oh, okay. I've got it.
But
there we go. Okay. So yeah.
Oh. Oh, goody. All right.
Okay.
Are you back?
I'm back. Yes.
Seems we have some ghosts in the machine today. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I think this happened last time you were on, and I
think it did too.
I don't know. It's someone doesn't want us to get sciencey about fear, but if you could pick up where you left off, or
Sure. So in our research, we found that people who reported feeling like they learned about themselves and challenged their fears, their positive mood ratings were higher, and that also correlated to brain activity that suggested that they essentially weren't thinking as much. So, when we are really frightened, all of our resources are going to our body. We're not getting caught up in ruminations and all of the anxiety that comes with ruminations and thinking about what we have to do. It just kind of, fear can just take a sledgehammer to it and just knock all that thought out. And it's a similar response to dunking your head in a bucket of cold water to try and just kind of reset your mind and knock it out of some rumination cycles. So that's why it can be helpful. Again, under the right circumstances. But and then the other reason I always like to highlight for why we enjoy fear and how it can be a positive thing is that it can bring people together. It can also push people apart. Of course, we know fear is, a toxic force in society often. But when doing something fun and scary together, it can build strong social bonds and generate feelings of closeness and unity. There's some really cool research looking at even how our things like heart rate can sync up when we're in a group activity and doing something together and focused on a shared experience. And so that's real. I mean, there's a reason why all of these traditions about, chanting and doing kind of group focused activities are popular, is because they do generate that sense of connectedness. And, this gets into a bigger topic, but one of the biggest existential fears is that, when we die, nothing happens and nobody cares. But during those group activities, we feel like we're connected to something bigger than ourselves. And that is really key to just general well-being.
That could extend you mean to something like Bloody Mary or engaging in things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up having sleepovers and standing in the mirror. And I know that different traditions, we would do it as a group in the mirror, but I know sometimes, one person would go at a time to see if they could say Bloody Mary 3 times. But those form memories. Those are the things of nostalgia and shared experiences that keep us kind of threaded together.
Well, based on your studies, I know that you examine people as they're going through haunted house attractions and other situations, and I know you partook in a lot of situations yourself. But you also explored paranormal investigators, and I was curious: is there a difference between sort of the results, the data you got from someone that's going through a haunted house attraction versus someone that's spending time in a place that's actually believed to be haunted?
Yes, and I really want to get back to this data. We haven't published on it yet, but I really do want to, because it was interesting to see the differences. And again, this isn't published yet, but hopefully will be soon. And what we did is I did a pre-post survey and then tracked people's skin conductance as they went on a paranormal investigation. And what was interesting is mood did go up. So similar to what we found in haunted attractions, people did feel better afterwards. But what was really interesting is that people also felt more sad afterwards. So it was a case of feeling good to feel sad, and that's something that doesn't get a lot of attention. But if you think back through your, kind of memory Rolodex, it's why we like to watch sad, kind of dramatic movies, why we like to cry at stories. Sometimes there is a catharsis that can come from feeling and engaging with sadness, with kind of loss. And in the case of the paranormal investigation, it was a very quiet investigation. There's a lot of different types of investigations, as I'm sure this audience is aware, and this one was the type where everyone would go into a room and sit in silence and in the dark for about 20 minutes in different rooms. So it did, I think, and the stories were not super sensational. It was just basic kind of facts, like this thing happened here, this tragedy, this loss. And so, in those moments of togetherness and silence and darkness, my interpretation of the data is that people were engaging with that loss and feelings of sadness, but that's what they wanted. That's why they decided to dedicate time and resources to going on an investigation, is because they wanted to engage with something, outside of that was no longer here, no longer with us. So it was really interesting. And during that, I had them connected to the measuring their electrodermal activity, and also had an RFID reader, and told them to tap that tap basically this little unit to put a little data marker that flagged when they felt like they were in the presence of something paranormal. And it's beautiful. I mean, we do see those spikes, and what direction it's going, whether people, feel that they're in the presence of something and that makes them happy, that can lead to a spike. It can, I can't say anything about causality, but from what's happening in the body and the interpretation of it, people were, impacted by the experience, and ultimately their mood improved afterwards. So,
was this if you can say, was this a private group, or was this like a paranormal event?
It was a private group. It was, let's see, my sample size, I only had 20 people, but the larger group I think was limited. I can't remember the exact size, but the groups that were going into the rooms were small, were just 20 people. And this, I think I could say where it was. It was at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park in Colorado. And so it felt very intimate. The Stanley Hotel is not the Overlook Hotel in the Shining. So the Stanley, I know I was surprised when I got there, and it felt a lot smaller than what I was expecting in the movies. But it is kind of, I would describe as an intimate environment that's just in and of itself generates that feeling of awe, the awe-inspiring, but quiet and kind of dark.
That was for Amy Bruni's event?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So with it's curious because I'm fascinated about this idea of like, okay, a haunted house attraction is one thing, and a paranormal investigation conducted by a small group that's maybe trying to assist a client, or they're doing it themselves, that's kind of another thing. But then this middle ground of a ticketed, attended event where people are also kind of pursuing the thrill factor. It's not just the connecting with the dead to help someone. It's like there's that thrill factor too. It's fun.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh, well, I'm just excited to share that. So we have the paranormal data. We have the data from Scare House, which from 2 years, which is an extreme kind of attraction. And then just this past fall, I collected data from an attraction that's more family friendly. Now, I only have approval through the university to enroll people over the age of 18, but this event is designed for 13 and up, and it includes a hayride and then 4 attractions that you go through in a linear fashion. And the scare level is, medium to just below R rated, I guess you'd say. And so it's not as intense as the data, as the attraction at Scare House. And so between these different data sources now, we're able to see whether there is some kind of, I use this loosely, but like a dose response relationship. And we're working on this paper right now on the 2022 data, and it will include data from 2015 too. But we see that mood did improve significantly, similar to the previous data, but it wasn't it was both were significant improvements in mood from before to the after, but this wasn't as significant of a jump. And so we know that in the previous data from the extreme haunt, that people who rated it more intense and more thrilling and more scary did see bigger jumps in mood. And in this case, so far, and we still have analysis to do, but there isn't the same kind of relationship. And so we do see that while mood improves, maybe there is something to look at in terms of how intense the scare is. But other researchers have been looking at kind of designing the perfect scare. And it's interesting. I mean, there is a relationship between, how intense you feel in your body and self-report measures. So trying to find that kind of sweet spot of where it's the right intensity to get the most bang for your buck in terms of mood improvement, before going into territory where it's just, too much and it stops being fun and, becomes real fear.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
Oh, so I think it's interesting to see that mood improves across the board, but the intensity may be different, and we might start seeing some differences in how that impacts mood. But it's also subjective how intense someone experiences it. So that plays into it too.
Is there such a thing as like a fear tolerance where we do want to push the needle a little further, and that which might explain extreme sports, extreme haunted house attractions?
It's a good question, and it's been, a lot of researchers have looked at it, and when we look at kind of what is pushing the button on enjoyment, a lot of times it's more related to novelty rather than intensity. So sticking to just looking at haunted attractions, you can get the same kind of fear response from a repeat visitor when you change the theme, but it doesn't necessarily have to be more bloody and more gruesome and more bones and more blood and more weapons. It could just be making it something that is totally unexpected and not necessarily more gore, but just different. And it's that novelty that we really like and seek out, that drove our species to explore and keep going. You look at kids too, you see this natural curiosity to investigate what is happening somewhere. And so there's that approach kind of avoidance that happens because we don't know what it is, but in order to decrease our anxiety, we want to find out what it is to know whether we should just keep being anxious or not. So that underlying that is more novelty rather than intensity.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned sort of the campfire community experiencing these fear can bring us together, but when we experience it alone, if we're locked in that bathroom alone, or not even that, but creeped out in a hotel or an asylum or whatever, when we're alone, is it less kind of, I don't want to say healthy, but less cathartic to experience?
So I don't have any data on solo kind of scary experiences, but I can speak from my personal experience when I was working on Scream and I was doing all of these different kinds of scary things, from thrill rides to attractions to investigations, cemetery tours, and whenever I would do one of the thrill rides, these record-breaking roller coasters that I think I rode the steepest one in Mount Fuji Q in Mount Fuji Q in Japan, and it was thrilling and so exciting. But I did feel a sense of afterwards when I was by myself and I didn't have anybody to turn to and high five or hug, and in those moments of recognizing that you're alone when you kind of wish you weren't, it generates a feeling of loneliness. Even if you're really happy and excited, when you wish you had someone to share it with, you feel alone. But in some cases that was preferred for me, being able to go and explore Eastern State by myself, or I did a cemetery tour in Bogota, and that was more of I wasn't by myself, but I was the only person who didn't speak Spanish. And I was kind of separated from the group a little bit. And I was glad to be alone and kind of able to consider things just without regard to what was going on with the people around me.
Mm-hmm. I forgot about your explorations in Bogota. That's where you're pursuing the cemetery, but also dealing with very real world threats.
Yes.
Yes. Well, with that in mind, how can the group of people you're around impact sort of this fear response, insofar as, based on your data, or if you could kind of extrapolate whether you're with fears when you're experiencing fears with peers versus authority figures
Fears with peers.
Fears and peers versus authority figures versus strangers?
Yeah. So we did collect data that was designed to try and measure the impact of being with someone. So during our data collection pre-post at the extreme haunt, we had people do this 15 minutes of different types of tasks. And while we measured their brainwave activity, and one of the tasks was exposing them to these really loud, awful sounds. It's really uncomfortable. And we had them do that while they held the hand of someone else and while they were alone. And we see, and I leave this to Greg's interpretation because, he does all of the analysis of the different types of brainwaves, but that holding someone's hand basically indicated that it was less bad. And this has also been confirmed. This is picking up on James Cohen, who's a researcher. He's done a ton of studies looking at ways to reduce fear for kids who are undergoing scary medical procedures, particularly MRIs. They can be very scary for kids, going into this tube and the sounds. And he did these experiments looking at the impact of holding their mother's hand while doing that, and saw a huge decrease in reactivity. And so he went even a step further than that, and other researchers started doing this as well, looking at just, does it matter if it's the hand of a stranger? Can it just be anyone? And found that the relationship holds up, that even if it's just a stranger that we're holding the hand of when something scary happens, it helps. Now, if it's an authority figure, that's a different story. And there have been studies looking at how much changes in our understanding of everything when we know we're in the presence of an authority figure, and nothing even needs to be said by that person. Just the situation of knowing there is a power imbalance changes everything, changes the dynamic. I think that I went on a little tangent there, but I think that maybe addresses the question.
Yeah. That's definitely apt. There's this old expression that there's no atheists in a foxhole, right? And
right.
Although I don't necessarily agree with that, and I certainly don't want to begrudge any of our atheist friends out there, I am curious if that is true from a fear response. If you don't believe in something, is it just not going to scare you if you're wandering around in that old Eastern State Penitentiary, old asylum or whatever? Or is there something that does click in, that even if you don't believe in it, suddenly that fear machine starts revving up?
Yeah. Our survival instinct definitely kicks in regardless of what we think will happen, after we die. If we just want to stay alive. And part of that, if I can get a little existential for a moment, but part of staying alive is also thinking about, or just even unconsciously thinking about, the fact that when you're dead, just nothing exists, nothing of you exists anymore. And so when we're thinking about the survival mode kicking in, we want to believe that we will continue on, and we can do that by connecting ourselves to something bigger than ourselves. And Durkheim talks about this in his writings on religion, and how, it is that part of our survival is how can we survive? We can believe we are part of something bigger. And that makes us feel better because it protects us against that existential threat of death. So even if we don't believe in a specific God or religion or spirituality or anything, that desire to feel part of something bigger is typically found. I don't want to go so far as to say that everyone will feel that, but it is a thing that's likely driven our civilization forward a lot, is that desire to belong and to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. To know that then if we die, that bigger thing will continue on, and we were a part of it. So we never die, kind of idea.
You mentioned kind of fear mongering earlier, and I would imagine a sociologist would be a great cult leader and a great fear monger. Uh, from that sociological standpoint, why is fear mongering so nefariously effective as a motivator? Why does it work? And I will even say, like, when you're watching the news or when you're reading things out there, what are you looking at where you're like, oh, this is classic, they're definitely fanning some flames here?
Yeah. So this was part of my dissertation, which was not focused on fear at all, but I was using a lot of theory from social movements, and I was looking at parent groups that organized around the idea that vaccines cause autism. And this was back in the early 2000s. And, one of my findings after doing all these interviews with parents and a lot of surveys and qualitative analysis is that fear was powerful motivator to organize. And it is in all social movements. I mean, having some, social movement is organized around trying to change something. And fear can do that really effectively, because typically when and I'll just talk about using fear intentionally. So if you're using fear intentionally, typically in most effective kind of campaigns, you scare them and then you have an answer to that fear. So you scare them and then you make them feel better. And now you've created a relationship of trust that, this person told me, they informed me about something I should be afraid of, and now they're going to protect me. And not only are they going to protect me, but look at all these other people who are now with me too. And so you get a feeling of assurance and a little bit of safety and unity all packaged up for you. And it's, something that happens, we may not even be entirely aware that it's happening. So fear campaigns are, behind a lot of just fake news. All of the Trump administration, is just perfected kind of fear mongering and using it as a way to divide people, but at the same time garner support and group people into these, encampments. And what happens along that way is that people may not realize that their fear response is essentially being hijacked for political purposes or personal gain of another party. For example, in a cult, that their fear is being used against them. And so one of my big speaking points when I talk to students is to really underscore the importance of understanding your own fear so that doesn't happen. So that when you read something in the news that makes you at first go, oh my gosh, you can stop and say, okay, wait, what is actually happening here? Let me double check this, look at other sources and confirm this is actually true. And my concern, there's a lot of talk about desensitization and fear desensitization and what happens with that. And I think that and it's not just me, this is a widely discussed question of what happens when you just don't believe everything, when everything that you read is scary, when every kind of little bit of information is shared through a lens of fear. What is that doing to our understanding of fact? If we can't just get it free of emotion, if we can't just get the straight facts, if all information is tinged with fear, are we just going to completely disengage as a self-protective mechanism? And so that's a real concern.
Yeah, it sounds like these are, on one hand, experiencing fear as a group can be this fun thing, can be it's a shared experience. It can bring people together or build social bonds. That's when, and on the other side of that coin is the using fear to bring people together, but also to as a device to other people to create an other, and manipulating that fear to act poorly, act badly.
Yeah, that's why I love fear. Fear can be used as a tool. It can be a word to describe an emotion. It can be all these different things, and it's so dependent on who's using the word and how it's being deployed. And sometimes I wish we had more words to label our emotions, more words to describe when fear is being used in a good way or a bad way. And I encourage people to make up their own. I now, fun scary has become such a normal part of my vocabulary that I'll just say, oh, I'm feeling fun scared, and that's like a real emotion for me now, and I've used it to help distinguish between those fun scary feelings and the not so fun scary feelings. So being able to label our emotions is helps us process them more quickly. So I encourage people to try and think about their fear map and what kinds of different fear they have in their lives, and it'll help them, I think, process it better and know how to use it to their advantage. And because fear, ultimately, the response is designed to protect us, is responsible for our survival and all species survival. So we don't want to just eliminate fear. We just want to make sure it's being used to our advantage, to protect us.
So fun scary versus, I don't know, bad scary.
Yeah.
When we enter into a place that, and this is from sort of a paranormal investigative standpoint, let's think about it. If you're choosing to enter this haunted building and spend a couple hours there, and then you leave and you can have that release, compare that to when someone is never able to leave that fear state, someone that must constantly feel existentially threatened or is constantly in that haunted location. How do you
Yeah.
view those differences when you're never leaving that fear state?
Well, that's when, I mean, from a clinical perspective, it becomes a clinical, issue. It becomes PTSD, chronic stress, anxiety, all of the different types of conditions that impact our life in such a profound way that it's difficult to do what we want to do without that sense of fear getting in our way. And it gets in our way in so many different ways. Those who are living in a chronic state of fear, and it's not as though, in many cases, it's not as though that person is thinking like, oh my God, I'm so afraid, and that they're walking around like they just, had a startle scare. It shows up in chronic conditions like problems with metabolism, IBS, depression, anxiety. The impact takes a huge toll on our body because our body is living in that's we're exhausting our body constantly when we're living in chronic fear and stress. A violent home, a violent neighborhood, a war-torn area, when our body is constantly in that fight or flight mode, and it's just exhausting. I mean, think about how tired you feel after riding even a roller coaster. You're just sitting there, but then you're exhausted and you're just like, oh my gosh, you can only ride so many until you need a nap. And it's because all of our body is pushing go on everything. And to have our body in that state chronically is just so taxing. And that's why, it's so important for people who do feel that kind of chronic stress and fear and underlying kind of anxiety to talk to people, to get help, to find resources that, are going to help alleviate that. And, one of those ways might be through finding scary experiences that you can control and be able to say, okay, I was feeling afraid then, but I'm not now in this situation. So how can I try and feel that way, in these other situations where I'm just trying to, leave the house? I mean, social anxiety post-COVID is so real and so prevalent and so natural. I mean, if you're confined to a space, quarantined for so many months, And we're constantly adapting to our environment. And so anything that is scary is going to be abnormal to our daily living. And so if we've now reduced our daily living to this safe little small space, it is going to feel scary. It's going to feel legitimately taxing on your body to leave the house. And so the easier solution is just to stay inside. But the more we kind of back off, and every time we hit that threshold of feeling like, and we keep backing off, eventually that's how, it can lead to things like agoraphobia and isolating. So we want to continue to try and push ourselves past that point, but it's hard. It can be really hard.
It's like it seems like some fears will sunset because we as a society evolve, or less, even though we did just come out of a global plague, maybe less concerned about getting the plague, or less concerned about a saber-toothed tiger taking us out. It's those fears sunset. Are you finding some fears currently are sunsetting, or are you seeing new fears on the rise? But I realize that I'm asking you a big question that you're kind of speculating on.
Yeah, I think in terms of hearing what my students are saying and my classes on the discussion forums, there's real fear about our rights, as women, as minorities, in a world where, I should say a country where these divisions are deepening and they're not going away. There is real fear about what the future could look like for populations that have fought so hard to just get basic rights, now to see that they're legitimately at risk of being taken away, or already have been taken away. I mean, it's honestly, it's terrifying. And I know I often teach my students, I try to find examples of countries across the globe where things can change fast. You look at countries where it used to be totally acceptable for women to wear skirts and work in the same workplace as men, that are now, under strict religious law. And so I think that fear is becoming very real. I mean, it is real. It is, and it is very scary. So those are pushed to the front of a lot of students' minds, a lot of people's minds. And I think fear around financial security. We're seeing a lot of fears that are very fundamental to just being able to live. The rising rent cost. Oh my gosh, students, my heart goes out to students today. It's so hard. And so I think those fears are definitely coming forward, and it's just the I don't know, acute kind of fears, or maybe they take the back burner because now we're just trying to figure out whether or not we'll be able to have a job, and dealing with the loss or the grief over the fact that, oh my gosh, I might not actually be able to own a house one day. A lot of those dreams that were so kind of normal for middle-class Americans, white middle-class Americans back in the 50s, 60s, 70s are just not really that feasible today. And so, yeah, sorry to bring it down.
No, it's fascinating. I forget the terminology, but I was listening to an interview not so long ago about the health effects of people being in constant financial insecurity, and it sounds very much, they didn't frame it, and again, I forget the term that they used. They didn't frame it in a fear response, but that's exactly what they were talking about. Is like when you're just constantly in this experiencing this toll of like, all right, will I be able to pay for the rent? Will I be able to feed the children? The constant feelings of anxiety just wears people down, and they were experiencing a lot of health effects as a result. So then you add to that, like, am I as a person of color or a minority or whatever, will I continue to exist? Like, will I be able to continue to exist? I think that is it's okay that it's not just about paranormal. It's a very relevant thing to talk about.
Yeah. It's, I think well, at least in the context of sociology, we think a lot about fear in war-torn areas and refugees and how scary that is. And now we're almost seeing, these state-by-state changes in abortion bans and limitations on teaching basic diversity, and that we'll see kind of state refugees, really, people moving from states just to try and find better protections or just to be protected in general. So it's a lot to think about and to be scared about.
Yeah, most certainly. And yeah. I don't want to minimalize that, not at all. But I was curious if I could give a rundown of some fears and maybe get the bullet points of why we're afraid of these things, why this scares us.
Sure.
Okay, so the dark. That's a big one to start with. Why are we afraid of the dark? And why is it also fun scary?
Yeah, it's a great one to look at. So we're afraid of the dark for a couple different reasons. First and foremost, because fear is the underlying factor in fear is the unknown, uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, which leaves open the opportunity that something horrible is going to happen. And so in the dark, we can't determine up or down, especially if there's just no light. And a lot of us, I encourage everybody to try and find a completely dark room. Maybe if you have a basement or a closet, but all we need is the tiniest little dot of light to help us determine up and down and left and right. And when that is totally gone and you sit there for 5 minutes, you'll find that you become completely disoriented pretty quickly. And so then that messes with all of our proprioception, our idea of where our body is in space. So even if we wanted to act out of fight or flight, we don't even know where to go or to direct that energy. Our balance is off, and all of these layers of uncertainty increase the anxiety until we're, really just kind of like frantically trying to find a light. And of course, anything could be hiding out there. So then our imagination kicks in, and we can't help but imagine the worst case scenarios, because through doing that, we're hoping to prepare ourselves. That's why, people often like prepper, like apocalyptic kind of films, because it's a way of kind of thinking that we've now prepared for it, and we're ready for it. So we can imagine the worst and deal with it in our mind or on screen. So yes, in the dark, anything is possible, and that includes anything bad, and that's just, that's terrifying.
What about, you mentioned closets? What about closets and under the bed? Why are we scared of those?
Another case of uncertainty and not knowing, and then this is where culture and stories and folklore and tales come into play, because we all, I won't say we all, but most societies have stories about the boogeyman and things under the bed. And, it's a great tool for parents to use to try and control kids' behavior. And so, these different scary monsters are introduced, and they can keep kids in their room. They can keep them out of the basement. It can keep them, from going places they shouldn't go. And then as soon as we have that kernel of an idea that there is something scary in some place we can't see, then our imagination just can go wild, and anything can be under the bed. And so it's a lot of, when you look at what the boogeyman looks like, it's going to be highly influenced by culture and religion and time, place.
And what about, open spaces, or, those big old empty abandoned locations, or maybe even the long hotel hallways that we sometimes find ourselves in?
This is actually a really interesting area to look at, because there's also researchers studying these kinds of spaces. They're described as awe-inspiring, but they can also be scary because it's so big. It's so it's just so something is just so immense that we can't wrap our mind around it or know what's on the other side or know where it ends. I mean, when I lived in Denver, oh my gosh, I know a lot of people look at the mountains and they feel this sense of like positive, awe-inspiring, oh, the majestic mountains. I felt nothing but loss and like the world is meaningless. And it just, for me, it was not that type of awe-inspiring experience. It was very kind of, I'm so small and insignificant compared to this thing. But for me, that didn't feel good. That same understanding can feel good sometimes, but totally overwhelming and make you feel small at other times. So.
Do you view that differently than liminal spaces?
How to describe what you mean by liminal spaces?
Liminal, like as in these in-between spaces that not quite where the living continue to operate, but these in-between spaces.
I think probably similar feelings happen because it is that idea that you can't wrap your mind around the space, that you can't really fully feel like you are able to be a part of the space, that you're kind of set apart from it. And that's another way, though, that it can feel like we are part of something bigger than ourselves because it is just beyond our touch. Yeah.
When I know we've talked a bit about like dolls versus clowns, and then you even got into zombies and vampires, and the kind of cultural fear of those. Talk about that a little bit. Do you view all of them in one basket of fear?
I think that they share some commonalities if we're talking about clowns and creepy dolls and, monsters that are somewhat human. They're all tapping into part of the uncanny valley where we want them to be human and look kind of as we would expect them to look, and they don't. That generates kind of friction in our mind, and we're like, why, the eyes are too big, that's not normal. And so there's that, but then each of the characters is going to bring in different elements. So with the creepy dolls and creepy kids, it's playing on the juxtaposition of something that we know or imagine to be innocent and sweet and kind, and now it's not that. And so that distance between what we expect and what we're seeing, it can be measured in fear, and the further away it is, the more scary, until it hits that point, described in the uncanny valley, where it's so different that we're not even thinking of it. It's not connected to what we think it should be anymore. So, crossing from zombie into something like like a squid monster, something that's so far away from human that our expectations aren't trying to put it in the human category anymore.
And the exaggerated characteristics of something like a clown plays into the fear response.
Yeah. And I think now, I know that scary clowns have always been a thing. Fear of clowns in general is so multifaceted because you had a lot of not early history, but the French clowns who, and even going back, clowns have always been kind of layered as not just trying to provide some sort of fun, but kind of devastated, that they were people set apart. And so there's always been some negative kind of elements within the clown character. And then we had, the 80s movies, the Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is just a classic. And today, the clown, I gotta say, it feels like it's more introduced and understood as a scary monster rather than a childhood, friendly, cheerful thing. So we are almost kind of potentially, this is just a theory, I just think about this, we're potentially reducing the impact of scary clowns because we now mostly understand them as a scary figure. So if we lose that connection to the thing that we think it should be, it's not scary anymore, or not as scary. It could be scary in the same reason that any monsters can be scary, because of the design and their actions and movement and makeup and costumes. But in terms of playing on the juxtaposition of what we think something should be and what we're seeing, I think we're losing that, because it's just, we just don't know them as fun, cheerful characters anymore.
I don't know.
It's just a theory, though. I mean, I could be wrong.
Well, no, it's the more it enters into the realm of the monster of pop culture, it can be scary within that context, but maybe less of a scary thing, less of a phobia. Maybe it's like
like we need a palate cleanser to kind of reset the field on clowns and try and grow some more references to the cheerful clown to maintain the idea of the scary clown.
Yeah.
So.
Once we all agree that something is scary, it's almost like it's in vogue to even say, "Oh, I have a fear of clowns." Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
So. I don't know if you've given much thought about this, about Bigfoot versus aliens and why we might fear these. I feel like we've got some material there. Why would people be afraid of Bigfoot? Why would people be afraid of this notion of extraterrestrials or aliens?
For the monsters that I would describe as kind of Earth-based, I mean, that's silly to think of it that way, but the chupacabra, Bigfoot, abominable snowman, Wolverines are real, but the monsters that could actually be here, that we could find a way to justify it and think, well, if that happens and that happens and there's this kind of mutation, then this is a real possibility. The fear is in that real possibility. At the same time, that can be true for aliens too. I mean, we know that Earth is statistically unlikely to be the only planet with life forms. So there's that reality in there too, that, oh, this could be. And so to imagine it, these part of the fear of them, at least in the fun sense, is that you can imagine all of these possibilities. And it's just kind of fun to think about these creatures living among us, or aliens that are so much smarter than us and that bring with them, yes, some fear, but also opportunity, and just, it just is like a key that opens up our imagination to all of these different possibilities that could that have just enough truth to kind of get us there.
Are they both similar, Bigfoot and aliens? Are they both similar insofar as sort of a bit of a food chain fear, that with something like a Bigfoot or chupacabra or cryptids that are out there, I guess there's also a bit of an uncanny valley. It looks like us, but it's not quite us. But it throws our ideas about the natural order out of whack, because there's something else out there that could be meaner and bigger and scary. And then with the extraterrestrial element, it's the intelligence food chain problem, that there's something bigger and smarter and makes us feel more insignificant. So is that,
yeah?
Right,
definitely. That's more so probably than what I just said. Thinking about the fact that we're not at the top of the food chain, that we could be easily destroyed by something, is terrifying. At a mass scale, especially with aliens and alien invasion. If they've gotten here, then right, they're smarter than us and can therefore destroy us, or put us in the matrix. But yeah, after we're so used to being the top of the food chain, until we find ourselves in the dark, in the woods, with no cell phone reception, then we remember, oh, without these tools, we are not the top of the food chain. There's so many animals and diseases, and just nature can kill us so easily. So.
And I'll ask you one final question about it. But sort of this notion of, we talked about the fear of ghosts that makes us confront our own mortality and things of that. But is there this kind of popularized fear of demons. Have you given much thought about what it is about that scares some people? Fun scare and scare, bad scare?
And there's a whole category of religious themed kind of scares and monsters. And so, again, in those spaces, you see that a lot of the tension and anxiety is coming from this juxtaposition of good and evil. And that with the case with like angels and demons, it's not always so clear cut who is good and who is bad. And there's a lot of room to play with how we think of them and who these monsters are. So you can create the villains that are quote unquote bad, but then might do some good. And a lot of that is coming from culture and religion and space and time, like a specific space and time. And, the impact of shows is very real. Lucifer, and that's just the first one that came to mind. I know there's a lot of other shows out there that kind of play with that space. And if a person truly believes it, then it is even a more real fear. But it's again that kind of good and bad, dark and light, that creates tension.
Once we open up the possibility of something inherently good and greater being out there, then the opposite potentially being true, the ultimate bad, the ultimate evil being out there. It's kind of quite this scary notion because, again, we're kind of small compared to that.
Yeah. And it forces us to also think about our own moral compass, kind of like ghosts prompt us to think about our own death. The demon and angel make us think about ourselves and reflect on ourselves. Are we good or bad? Is there an idea of a fundamentally good or bad person? Do our actions alone define whether we're good or bad? Or is it something deeper and intangible, like a soul?
Yeah. Well, my friend, I've kept you far too long. But before I let you go, I must know what's next. What are you working on? And then
we got to get this paper done with the 2000 this fall data, and that includes data from 2015. I just got to do it. It's like number one on my priority list, and it's one of those things that it's all there. I just got to put it together and put some words around it and submit it to a journal and get it out there. So that is number one goal. So that's, I kind of am not allowing myself to think of anything else until I get this done.
Well, how can people support you in your work?
I don't know. I think sending positive writing vibes my way, to encourage writing. It's something I love to do, but it's instances where, you have to do it, that it takes away the fun sometimes. So, but I want to do it, but it's just writing for peer-reviewed journals is not quite as much fun as writing, a book or just to get the message out there. So,
well, I'll kind of plug a little bit for you. Another way to support you is by heading over to Amazon or a bookstore.
Oh yes, that would be
picking up Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, and Ouch, Why Pain Hurts and Why It Doesn't Have to. And
I did a great courses. Actually, I think it's called it's a great course on fear. I think if you search great courses, sorry, I should have the link or reference right on the top of my head, but I don't. But if you're interested in learning more about anything I discussed today, it's a 24 episode kind of lecture series all about fear.
Great course.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll get that link and we'll drop it in the episode description and everything.
Oh,
but
thank you.
Margee, Dr. Margee Kerr, my friend, my smart friend that I get to brag about knowing. And I'm always excited when I see her doing all these other interviews out there. And then I'm super stoked and when she's able to find time for me. So, Margee, thank you so much You know I love you to death. You know I just respect the hell
Always
out
a
of you.
pleasure. Yeah. So much fun every time. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. And for all you out there, thank you for watching this. Thank you for listening to this. And this has been Talking Strange. If you have stories you'd like to share of the strange and unusual or guest suggestions, I want to hear about it. Email us at talkingstrange@denofgeek.com. And I am Aaron Sagers. And until next time, my friends, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.